Hi, my name is Irfan, and this is a demo video. We're going to speak about design thinking through the next 7 or 8 minutes. So let's get started, right? In order to understand design thinking, it's primarily very important also to understand the connection between design thinking and digital transformation. One of the primary reasons why design thinking is becoming a much sought out tool in the market right now. And to start with, design thinking is a mindset which would be the right mindset to apply in today's world, which is going through a lot of transformation, especially how we define in terms of digital transformation. So let's quickly define what digital transformation and give an example to understand what digital transformation is. So here's the definition. Digital transformation is any transformation of the business where you are using digital technology to redefine the way you're doing business, right? Let's take a simple example in order to understand that. Let's say you are a strawberry farmer somewhere in India, and you want to sell your products not just to the local market but all across the country and maybe international markets, right? So in order to do that, you will have to primarily change the way you are doing business right now. So you're just being a farmer who is producing delicious strawberries and selling it in the local market, right? You will have to create a brand for yourself or your company you represent for, and then bring this brand into focus of people who are interested to buy your strawberries. Now, those people might be local, those people might be from the surrounding areas where the farmer is, or those people might be nationwide or across the border, maybe in foreign countries, where there's an opportunity for this farmer to sell his strawberries. So what does the farmer do? The farmer first creates a brand saying Navneet strawberries, and he creates an identity for himself. And then the brand has to go on a platform, so he creates his presence on the social media platform via Facebook, Instagram, etc. Of course, the farmer is taking help of a design transformation specialist, or let's say somebody is helping him out or giving the vision. So now his presence is on social media platforms. Now he has to reach out to the customers. He understands his customers and spend some money on digital ads. Then people start visiting his website. Now, what's the website? The website can be a simple website which is selling his products, right? The farmer need not struggle a lot. There are a lot of e-commerce platforms which produce or make websites which fulfill the requirements of such small businesses. The farmer can also use apps like Shopify, or even tie up with one of the broad wholesale sellers like maybe Geomart or Big Basket, etc. Right? Now, in order to get to that level, the farmer has to transform his way of doing business so far, that is just growing strawberries and selling it locally, to building a brand, establishing his presence in the market, establish his presence in the eyes of the customers by getting on the social media platforms, and then enabling his customers a way to reach out and buy the strawberries directly for himself. The story yet hasn't ended. The farmer still has to fix his supply chains. How will he supply the strawberries to the customers who have ordered for it? So, transformation of the other nature of business. Earlier, he was getting the strawberries to the APMC yards and selling it to the local dealers. Now he just has to pack the strawberries and use a courier service and dispatch the order to the address which the customer has given. So here is a complete transformation of business for a small business like a strawberry farmer, right? Now imagine this impact for large organizations. We are not just speaking about organizations who are there in a digital presence or digital organizations. We are speaking about organizations which did not have any digital footprint. Now, why has this become more significant? Over the last 2 3 years of post pandemic, digital transformation has spiked a lot because people and organizations have realized that there is one definite way of reaching out to their customers and one definite way of doing business, regardless of the nature of the business, the product or the service that they're saying, that is transforming their business digitally. Moving various processes, moving various footprints, moving various touch points with their customers to digital touch points, right? So this is digital transformation. And where does design thinking come into the picture? A very important aspect of digital transformation or successful digital transformation is understanding from your customer's point of view as to what is the change that you need to go through, right? It might be a branding change, it might be presence in social media platform, it might be presence on an e-commerce platform, it might be any of these or a combination of these, right? So design thinking basically allows you to understand who your users are, what do they want, what is your problems, and are you addressing or you defining your business around solving those problems. It's a very non-traditional way of doing business, doing a startup or running an organization, where the significance, if I can go to the last slide, where the significance is given to these 5 stages. The significance is given to the stage called as empathize, where you focus on understanding who your customer is and what exactly does your customer want, right? By understanding who your customer is and what exactly is his experience, you also define as to what are the problems that he's facing. So the actual problem definition happens in the second phase of design thinking, which is called as define. Once you have defined the problems, you, without any judgment and having an open mind, come up with crazy, brilliant, out of the box ideas in the ideate phase, right? Now, then you evaluate those ideas based on your business feasibility, viability, and desirability of your customers. And those viable ideas which you want to take forward are then represented in the form of a prototype, right? Prototype is nothing but visual representation or realization of your idea. It need not be the final product, but it's something that can communicate the vision of what your product or service is. Once the prototype is ready, you test it with the users. You test it with whether it's your end customers or directly your users. You test it with your users and see what the feedback is. Now this whole cycle gets repeated iteratively. So let's get started with design thinking. The basic 5 steps has been defined and you are able to relate to the basic 5 steps. So let's move forward from here, right? So what is the mindset that you require for design thinking? Design thinking would require a rather open mindset in terms of having these characteristics. Design thinking is driven by curiosity, right? You curiosity which is taking you to understand the challenges of the users, curiosity to understand how you can solve those problems for the users. Now the second point over there is human-centric design. The other way in which design thinking is referred around the world, it is referred as human-centered design. What this means is that we are designing for humans, and in a simple way, it's humans who are designing it, right? And these humans who are designing it are your end customers or your users. So you are trying to understand what they want and bringing into the market exactly what they want. Now, it would be a very good point to understand why do corporations and enterprises need to do this. One, there is abundant amount of competition in your local market, in your international market. Two, your users or your consumers are not just locally based, they are across the nation, they are international. So there is no limitation of where your product can go, right? Three, you will have to understand, to be a successful organization or an enterprise or a company or a startup, you will have to understand what is the need in the market. 98% of startups fail because they go ahead with a vision that only the entrepreneur has who starts the startup. Not a lot of research in understanding what is really required in the market can be quoted as direct reason for why majority of the startups even today fail. So the key point over here is that whether you're a startup, you're an existing enterprise, or you're a small business, or you are a business running a hole in the wall kind of e-commerce platform or a reseller for an e-commerce platform, you will have to basically understand, in order to survive in the market, understand what is exactly needed. And here comes the concept of innovation. Organizations have to innovate, and in order to innovate, they'll have to take a human-centered approach in order to understand as to what do they focus their innovation energies on. What is the vision of their product, not because of what they think should be the vision of the product, but what is exactly the need in the market and how they can shape their product or shape their services to meet those requirements, right? Design thinking accept complexity as a standard challenge. So design thinking problems are complex problems. We do not approach simple problems with or apply design thinking to simple problems, right? Design thinking builds a lot on visualizing and showing and representing what your problem areas are or problem definition are, even representing what ideas and prototypes that you have in order to solve those problems, right? Design thinking largely depends on experimentation, the idea of experimentation, the idea of failing fast, experimenting fast, right? And the idea of iteratively going to cycle in order to achieve that efficiency. Now, this mindsets of iteration and experimentation comes from, you can say, a startup culture and to a very large extent from agile methodologies, right? Iteration is the nature of most of agile methodologies, right? So, design thinking also builds strongly on multi-purpose, multi-skilled teams, cross-platform teams, cross-job domains teams, in order to create that one solution or product for the company. So it's typically not just the developers and the architects and that's elite team which works on the product, but everybody involved from end to end in their business gets together to define or understand who they are dealing with as consumers and define a problem statement for them. So this requires a lot of collaboration. This requires collaboration across non-traditional teams, right? So if you're a product company, it's just not the product team, it's everybody involved in the business process end to end, including the customer and primarily the customer, whose inputs go on to define what are the features that our product will have next. Let's move on. It's option based or it's action based focused. Design thinking is action based. You do something in every step. You just don't come up with the concept and sit over there, right? And it is possibility driven. At every step of design thinking, you are always exploring possibilities. You are always diverging to understand how can I find more ways of solving this problem or addressing the issue which I have, right? So these are the mindsets that we require for design thinking. Now that we have understood what is required for design thinking, let's get into a little depth, right? So here are three very high level definitions. Design thinking stands for a dynamic approach to solve problems which we will call as wicked problems. We'll define that. An approach to problem finding, this is reframing the problem is something significantly important, right, in any kind of a business process, because if you haven't understood the problem right, then probably the solutions that you come up with is never going to work out for you, because you there is a flaw in understanding as to what is the problem definition, right? The third perspective of design thinking is a new perspective on value creation. Now, when you are creating value in the market by focusing on human-centered values and processes, and then you are co-creating with teams across your organization, there is definitely a chances that you're coming up with a product which others in the market haven't come up with, right? So it's a very new prospect for value creation. We are discovering new aspects of the customer which defines value, and you utilize this value creation aspects to maybe increase your business or expand your business or reach out to more customers, right? So these are a very high level of definition of design thinking. But here is design thinking in terms of the steps we do. Now, let's just remember that design thinking comes from various schools of thought. IDEO design thinking is primarily the first. And then you have various design thinkings. Microsoft has its own design thinking. Cisco has its own design thinking. IBM has its own design thinking. So, but let's remember that all of these processes across all of these organizations and various universities and various product companies who are using this, all of them have one similarity, that is the steps involved in design thinking or the phases involved in design thinking. So design thinking consists of three high level phases. First is understand, then is explore to find out solutions from what you have understood, and then actually to materialize and test those solutions, right? In terms of steps, it are these 5 steps which you can see on your screen. Empathize, that you conduct research with the user to understand what is the need for the users, and then you go to the define phase where you use all this richer research which you have in order to define what is the problem that we are trying to solve. Now, once the problem definition is done, you approach with an open-mindedness, with a lot of creativity to come up with ideas, being non-judgmental and building on each other's ideas to come up with a brilliant set of ideas. And then you say, these are the ideas that we're going to test out in our first iteration, right? So you select a few ideas and you prototype them. Now remember, definition of prototype in a manufacturing industry is different. But the definition of prototype in the design industry or design thinking industry is a visualization of what your idea is. So I have an idea in mind. I develop a prototype in order to convey that message. That prototype need not be the one that is sent into the market. That prototype need not be a blueprint of your final product, or that prototype process need not be a blueprint of your final business process. Right? It's something which represents the idea which you came in the ideate phase. So once we have the prototype, we take the prototype to the user and collect their feedback. Based on the feedback, we go into another iteration. You can see there is one extra phase over here which is called as implement. This basically speaks about implementing the prototype after your testing, right? Now let's look at one more nature of design thinking, which is the way in which we approach it. So you see the I right there in the center. The I represents the problem definition. So at this stage of the evolution where you see the I, we are defining the problem. We have defined the problem. Let's take a step back, right? So there are two parts of design thinking. One is the problem space and the solution space. So in the problem space, we speak to the users, we show empathy, we understand and observe them, and using empathy driven processes, we understand who the users is and what do they want, right? And once that done, we converge to understanding as to what is the problem that the users are going to have. So in the problem space, we diverge, we open up in order to understand the customer by observing them and understanding them. And then once we have collected that information, we converge with that information and then say, I've got this feedback, this is what the user says. Do you think this is the problem that they are facing? So during this phase, we use various methods in order to understand and represents the thought and emotions of our users, what the users feel, what they say, what they think, and what they do. And after we do that, we gain the understanding of what the customer needs, the user needs, and then we go to the stage of problem definition, which is over here. So once the problem is defined, we diverge again. We expand our horizon in terms of thinking or defining what the problem is, and then we come up with crazy, brilliant ideas which build on each other with open judgment. We are not looking at the end of the idea whether this is feasible or not. We are not being judgmental. We're just generating ideas. So what's really important over here is quantity over quality of the ideas. So once we have a couple of ideas, then we measure them as per our feasibility and business viability as well as the customer's desirability, and then say these are the ideas that we'll go forward with, and then we create prototypes. Again, I've said earlier, prototype is a representation of idea or the visual representation or kind of representation of an idea for your end customer. So once you have your prototype ready, you go to the customer and take the feedback from them when they interact with your prototype. And once you have all the feedback, you collect this feedback and you converge to understand what worked for you, what did not work for you, what are the other ideas that you can incorporate based on all of these interactions since the ideate phase, right? And you go back to speak to the customer if you want to do that. So this nature of diverging and converging and again diverging and converging is very essential to design thinking. Let's move on. Now I have given you an example over here. This is Scrum process. Scrum is an agile methodology. Now the reason for giving this is to make you associate that agile methodology is one of the standard part of digital transformation, especially if you're a product or a service company out there. There are a lot of examples for even manufacturing companies like Toyota who have emerged with methodologies which have been adopted by Agile. So it's not just for the manufacturing industry or the services or the product industry. Agile methodologies work for a lot of industries. And why are they a part of digital transformation? They are a part of digital transformation because digital transformation is a process which is iterative in nature, just like Agile. Over here, what I can explain is that let's say we have a product and this product backlog are a list of features that I want in a product. right? Now, if I'm going to develop 6 months developing the first version of the product, I will lose in the market. My competitors are going to come up in the second or the third week a version of the product which the users can download and they can use it, right? So what I really need is a non-standard software driven development cycle or a non-standard waterfall model, and here is where agile methodology comes in. At this stage, what you have to understand that the relationship between digital transformation, design thinking, and agile methodology is that they are iterative in nature. They focus on failing fast, learning from the process, and iterating again, right? And what's the beauty of the product? The beauty of the product or the agile process is that every 1, 2, or 4 weeks, that is the at the end of the design and implementation cycle. In agile or in Scrum, we refer to these cycles of development or whatever you saw, right? The 5 phases. That's one whole cycle. So this is referred as a sprint, right? So a sprint can be for 1 week or 4 weeks. At the end of 1 week or 4 week, we are sure that as per agile methodology, there is some incremental aspect about the product. So if you already have a product in the market, within 1 to 4 weeks, you are adding new features to the market. You are not waiting for 6 to 9 months before your first version of the product is released. This allows you to be agile and flexible in your whole development of the product or services which you're defining. So that's the relation between these three ideologies or the three we are speaking about: digital transformation, design thinking, and agile. Let's move forward. Right now, this is a different way of looking at design thinking. That is, we begin by understanding what is the current solution, what is the current situation, what is the problem that we need to solve, and then we go broader by asking what if, where we come up with a number of ideas to see what if we try this, what if we try this, what works, right? So the what if we come up with brilliant set of ideas at this stage, and then we go to the next stage and see which of these ideas actually work for the customer. So what are the ideas that the customer are interested in? Finally, we look at what actually works for the customer, right? So these are the 4 stages of design thinking from a different perspective. Let's look at what are the kinds of problems that design thinking solves. Now, we're going to look at what we call as wicked problems over here, which are defined here, wicked problems. So what are wicked problems? What are well-defined problems? Well-defined problems are problems which have a clear definition and have a clear solution in front of you. All you need to do is just put the solution in place. What are ill-defined problems? Problems which do not have a clear definition, right, and hence do not have clear solution to it, right? And you solve ill-defined problems by doing research, understanding user data, etc., until you find various solutions and do it, right? Now, in most of the cases, ill-defined problems will have certain definitions based on different stakeholders involving. But in terms of a wicked problem, these are unknown problems. You know there is an issue, but you don't know what exactly the problem is, right? And from your perspective, you have one vision of the problem. Maybe somebody in the organization has separate vision from the problem. So there is a problem, all of you agree, but you are not able to put a finger on that problem and say this is the issue, and hence the solutions for the problem are also so challenging because you're not able to define as to what that solution is until you are able to define the problem, right? So let's move on to see what are design wicked problems. So wicked problems are unknown problems. They might have different paths you need to take to find the solution, and one solution might not address the complete problem itself. And depending on who you are and where you are placed, you might look at the problem from a different perspective. Now, design thinking is what comes in place in order to define or solve such wicked problems. So let's look at the process of design thinking. You have already seen this, and I have iterated to you earlier that there are 5 phases in design thinking across the board, across different design methodologies. You will see a six stage that is implement. So primarily, let's look at empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. The cycle moves in this way, but you can also see the arrows move back. Now what this is this is significantly important. The nature of design thinking is iterative in nature, and what this means is that at any stage you go back to the previous stage or previous stages in order to validate what you are doing, right? You might when you're testing a prototype, you might discover that okay, these are the gray areas. So you go back, look at the prototype, or you go back to the user and speak to them, right, about the prototype and see if there are other features which you missed out in the initial conversation. And that is why this is iterative in nature, right? You can go from any phase forward to go to the for example, you have ideate. When you are ideating, you feel that not everything that we are defining is what we write, and then we go back to the definition phase to look at our problem statement and see whether we have defined the problem statement. So what you have to grasp from this slide is that it is iterative in nature, which also means that you go from one phase to another in order to validate. And iteration would mean iteration of this whole cycle, as well as going through one of the stages and then moving forward to the next phase, right? So you understand, you explore, and you materialize. That's the various life cycle. Okay. Now this diagram represents the same thing what we spoke earlier about diverging and converging. You can see when we are understanding the user, we are expanding our mindset. That is, we are diverging. We are and we are when we are observing, we are converging to observe what we are seeing it. And when we come to a point of view, we define that point of view over here. And once the point of view is defined, it also identifies for us what are the problem statements. And then we broaden our view by diverging in the ideate phase and in the prototype phase. And once the prototype is ready, we again go back to the convergence stage during the test cycle, right? So this is about the divergence and the convergence. Okay, let's just summarize and close up this demo video. So what's the vision we have from design thinking? The vision is shown by this diagram over here, which represents technology, that is a feasible aspect of what you're trying to do. Business, that's a viability, that is whether it is viable to run on a long term, whether the organization or the enterprise can continue doing what they are doing, and the outcome of your design thinking would support that. So the viability aspect is that orange circle over there. And the last is the human values, that is the usability and desirability. This is purely from a customer point of view or user point of view, right? So the holy grail, or the point where all these meet, feasibility, viability, desirability, and usability, they meet in this area where the actual design and innovation happens, right? So innovation happens in this particular area, and this is a principle very strong for design thinking. We believe that innovation happens on a common ground of feasibility, viability, and desirability, right? And this is the diagram that demonstrates the same, right? Let's quickly summarize this and close up the demo video. So here we have a complete cycle of the design thinking. There are various diagrams, so let's go through this. As a design thinker, or as a startup or an enterprise, I want to expand my business, and in order to do that, I also want to address the competition in the market, which means that I have to understand what do I have to develop in the market and what kind of services do I have to put out in the market. To do that, I start with the design thinking process. In the first step, I understand my user, understand who my users are across, right? I'm not just looking at my primary bulk users. I'm also looking users at my extremes, right? So these are called as extreme users. So we understand who our users are, or who our customers are, and we observe them. So we understand and observe. By this, we gain the empathy, or gain a understanding to who our users are and what do they want. By this, we are able to define the problem statement and define a point of view, right? Once the problem statement is defined from various inputs that we have, when we go on to the ideate phase, right, we come up with crazy brilliant ideas using simple methods, and we build on other ideas. We don't judge other ideas, and as a collaborative teamwork, we come up with certain amount of ideas, and then we say these are the ideas 1 2 3 4 which you are going to try out, or idea 1 in the first cycle. Then you create a representation of the idea by which you can explain it to your stakeholders and also your users. That is the prototyping phase. You go with the prototype to your users and understand what their feedback is, right? And that is the test phase. Now during the test phase, you have realized that you have defined the problem wrong. You go back to the problem definition phase. During the prototype phase, if you see that you're not clear as to what you're going, you go back to the previous phase, or you go back to problem definition phase. Now in any of these phases, you come back to the problem definition phase and you see that there is still gray areas, then you go back to the customer. So what you see over here is a full cycle, but what you also see over here is that this is iterative in nature, this is flexible in nature, and this uses a very different mindset from whatever processes or business processes you would existingly have. And this works perfectly across domains, across industry, across products, services, as well as different segments in the industry. So I hope this demo was good enough for you, and I hope it gave you a fair understanding of design thinking and how design thinking is related by digital transformation, and what is the significance of design thinking and this iterative mindset for companies, corporations, small businesses, and even the farmer out there, and how this can change your business from being market driven to consumer or human centered driven. Okay, thank you. My name is Rufan.